Is it working? It is working.
It is working.
Good afternoon. Me and
Doug is back there, he's hiding.
oh. Yeah, technically, Doug. Committee's up here, but I guess if you're comfortable there, that's okay.
Comfortable.
All right, we're gonna go with it. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Our first meeting of the Ag Advisory Committee for 2025. I think let's let the committee introduce themselves. We are not all here. Let's just go ahead.
Should I start?
Start with you.
Ron Mitchell.
Keep that sign from Town Line Road, Gary Mancher, Hemdale, Gary.
I'm Hal Adams. I run Blackbrook Farm on Kite Road.
John Marvin, Warren Fox Road.
Charles Bow from Bow Farms.
Okay, thank you.
Doug out there.
Mike, are you online? I did, Mike Putman's recovering from a surgical procedure and I asked him if maybe he wanted to zoom in. But,
At this point, I do not see anybody online.
okay. We've got an agenda item to approve minutes. Actually, the minutes have already been filed with the clerk for the last meeting, which was in October. So we'll just jump right into the body of the meeting. So why are we here? We're here because this committee was charged with a task that was part of the farmland protection plan of the town, which we adopted back in 2016, actually. And that farmland protection plan is also part of the town comprehensive plan, which was approved in 21. Is that right, Ron?
Yes.
2021. There's a goal statement in there, among many in the comprehensive plan. I'm just going to paraphrase it. It fostered agricultural viability and protect agricultural land resources. So that's one of the goals of many that are laid out in that plan. And then more specifically, this committee was tasked with implementing the farmland protection plan and evaluating the adoption of zoning amendments to support the findings of that plan. So evaluating zoning amendments is what we've been doing for over a year now in earnest. Basically, every meeting last year was devoted to that process. And now we're at a point where we're seeking some reaction, shall I say, from residents, particularly residents that are going to be most affected possibly by this. I would tell you that through the comprehensive plan process, we did surveys and they consistently show that there's public support or resident support within the town for supporting farm viability, preserving open space, and retaining the rural character in the town. So that drives some of the goals that end up in the plan. More specifically, at a high level, the goal of the policy we're going to talk about today is to minimize the loss of productive farmland in the town to rural development by using some additional town input to the process of subdivision. Let's see, the map is up. The lands that would be affected by these changes appear on the strategic farmland map, which is part of the comprehensive plan. I think it's map number 8. If you want to refer to the comprehensive plan, you can find that on the town website. And we'll probably be referring to that when Ron gives us his presentation. So in essence, what we're proposing is an agricultural conservation overlay district. And what that overlay district calls for is planning board and this committee's review of subdivision applications on the lands that are delineated in the strategic farmland map. Briefly, the process would require the landowner who is seeking a subdivision to have the soils on that parcel identified by productive capacity. We are focusing on soil classifications 1 through 4, which are the most productive soils. That's a classification done by the state of New York. That's not something we invented here. If your land is currently getting an ag exemption through the ag district law, you already have that information because you have to have those soil classifications, and that determines how much your exemption is. So in the vast majority of cases, a landowner that was seeking subdivision already has that information. If they're not in the district, then they would have to go get that from Soil and Water. So given that, the planning board and this committee, which is advisory only, remember, would review the proposal and possibly make suggestions of alternative site plans that could achieve the goal of person seeking a subdivision, but maybe lose less good soil in the process, to put it plainly. And that process would require planning board approval and would also allow the planning board to invoke cluster zoning regulation instead of the conventional zoning we have now, which actually is more flexible. It allows different frontages, different site plans to achieve the amount of subdivision that a landowner was looking for. We will get into more detail. I'm the amateur here, but I'm trying to paraphrase. And also the language we're considering, if the subdivision resulted in more than 2 parcels, it would require the landowner to provide what we call a full build-out plan, or in other words, what the ultimate subdivision of a parcel would look like. And that's subject to the state seeker process, environmental review. How am I doing so far, Ron?
Getting an A+ from here.
Right. The legal basis of this, which I think is important, that the town is taking here, if we adopt it, is that the town becomes a custodian of a scarce and valuable resource, which in this case is soil classifications 1 through 4. So that's, and there's precedent for that in water quality, air quality, those kinds of things. So that's the legal stance that the town is taking to make the basis for this. I know there's different viewpoints on this, and the goal today is for you to understand this well enough that you have a good considered opinion of it. Certainly one viewpoint, as I think back on the surveys, is that some people are going to say this is a pretty forward-looking policy that might help slow down Farmington turning into the town of Victor. you got to recognize we have strong development pressure in this town. And as I said earlier, interest in preserving some of the rural character of the town. So on the other hand, if you're a landowner, you may look at this as a hindrance to monetizing your farmland asset. I think we've tried hard not to make this proposal be much of a hindrance. And then I think you could have a more agnostic look at all this too. If you're a farm operator in this town, likely you are farming land you own, likely you are also farming land that you rent. And you may look at this as a way to keep a critical mass of farmland for your operation. But at the same time, perhaps it puts a little more guidance on what you can do with your own land going forward. I think it's important for us to think about factors that are preserving farmland in the town already. If you own farmland and it's in the ag district, you're getting the ag exemption, which is a quite favorable tax treatment. It provides quite a bit of tax relief. Our committee held a meeting on that topic, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And that kind of drove the point home that farmland is treated very favorably. I would also tell you that as we keep revaluing land in the town, that ag exemption is going to look more and more attractive, because it keeps you out of the fact that the market for even just farm to farm sales is going up. We also, another factor that certainly comes into play in this town is it's town policy not really to extend water and sewer into the whole town. We've got areas where we provide those services, and it again, going back to the comprehensive plan, there is language in there that it's not town policy to try and extend those infrastructure everywhere. And of course, water and sewer encourage development, certainly. I would also tell you this is a little bit, and tagging on to that, on the other hand, the town is encouraging development in the southwest quadrant of the town. So it's been town policy to guide development in one area and keep open space in other parts. And then lastly, in defense of this policy, and this is more Hal Adams' opinion than anybody else's, the vibrancy of farming in this town is not of the same caliber as other parts of this county, where we've got large, very aggressive dairy operations and vegetable operations that compete for land. They compete against development very well. I don't see that as being so much of a factor here in our town. So that might be an argument for the town trying to have a little more policy to conserve farming. All right, to wrap up, as I said, we spent all of last year working on this. In the beginning of the process, we more or less surveyed the rest of the state, municipalities in the state, to see what they were doing for farmland conservation. It really runs the spectrum. Some towns have adopted a right to farm law like we have here that addresses nuisance complaints against farming, basically. And it runs the whole spectrum to a town that was actually using transfer of development rights, which is a complicated, cumbersome, with real money involved kind of a process to approve development. So, and we didn't go anywhere near that. I would tell you that the proposal we have in front of us now has had a preliminary review by the Ontario County Ag Enhancement Board. It will have to be reviewed formally should we choose to recommend it to go forward. We've also run it by the Genesee Land Trust, because there was a question of whether this sort of a proposal would reduce the competitiveness of applications for conservation easements. And their answer was no, it does not. To sum it up, I would characterize this proposal, it mandates a process. It does not mandate an outcome, the way I look at it. There's considerable flexibility and give and take in the process. To go forward here after today, or at the point when this committee actually recommends the proposal to the town board, again, we are only advisory here. This proposal would be subject to formal county review and state review. And then it would, consideration by the town board. And now we didn't print the proposal out. I would just, for information, couple different things. If you want to get the minutes of this meeting and the actual language of this proposal is attached to our minutes, go to the town website, hit the departments category, and then find the button for Ag Advisory Committee minutes, and it's all there. You can download it, you can read it online, whatever. And the other place you would be interested in going, I believe, if you want to read existing town code, then go to the Building, Planning and Zoning button. And at the very, very bottom of that site, there's availability of the town code and zoning law. So you can access all that stuff. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our Director of Planning, Ron Brand. Ron will get into more detail, and he's got some slides where we're going to walk through kind of a example in a very generic way of what our existing zoning allows in agricultural areas and what this proposal would do differently. All right, Ron?
I'll come over to the podium.
Yep, okay.
And you can switch.
Yep.
I got my backup man here, Dan.
Yes, we've got our code enforcement officer, Dean Del Fiore, is here. He's also had input into the language of the proposal, because if it's adopted, he would have to
Enforce it.
implement it. Yeah,
No, yeah.
exactly.
Good music to start. Dancing. Opening mountains circumstances. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out. We picked a pretty good day to have the meeting. It wasn't blowing and snowing, and it's
Good luck.
even getting up above 10 degrees out there. So that's a reason. I'd also like to introduce Tim DeLucia, who's here from the planning board. Planning board has looked at various rules and regulations affecting what we're talking about today. They will play a very active role. As Hal has said, we have spent a considerable amount of time debating the pros and cons of how to respond to the goals of the comprehensive plan and the farmland protection plan. Going back in history a little bit, we had the farmland protection plan guided by ag and markets. And they were the ones that basically told us that we had to identify the strategic farmlands in this community. And we did that on the map, okay? So now that we've identified those strategic farmlands, what are we going to do to conserve them from development? Well, there's a number of things that we looked at across the state as Hal said, the various municipalities, how they approach this issue. Some more aggressively, some less. None of them address the purpose for regulating, being protecting of the resource base. And if we don't protect the resource base, what are we protecting? What are we conserving? So, as you may know, previously and for some time now, Ag Markets has had a provision in their rules and regulations that says anytime there's development of farmland, subdivisions, things of this nature, we have to do an ag data statement notice to adjacent landowners and to farmers in the area. But it doesn't really do anything because 9 times out of 10, nobody shows up. The farmer who rents the land doesn't show up because he doesn't want to be saying things to upset his lease agreement. And it's really not accomplishing what the state's intentions were, and that is to bring to the attention of the planning board, the impact of development occurring in these areas. So we have zeroed in on protecting the resource base. And that's further focused on protecting the soils 1 through 4, the prime and unique soils classification. So with all that said, there's other things that aren't apparent in these regulations. Maybe I'll just summarize them a little bit. There's a provision called seeker, which the state mandates that the planning board or any agency has to take into consideration. And one of the considerations, one of the items in that criteria is, what's the effect of this action on continued farming? Well, this is something that we are trying to accomplish here with these regulations by identifying, making the public more aware of these rules and regulations to protect those class 1 through 4 soils. The other part of the equation is as you start subdividing land on your property, you start triggering DEC and Department of Health rules and regulations. And I will tell you that there is a new state regulation in effect that state health department takes charge of subdivision, realty subdivisions, where you have 5 or more lots being subdivided, and where those lots have to have raised fill systems. The memo I got yesterday from the state health department basically says they're not approving this. So if the state health department doesn't approve them, there's nothing we can do here at the local level to deal with it. So the other part I think that we need to focus on is it's not any longer a simple process of extending utilities into the rural areas. We've tried for many years to get water in the eastern portion of town, only to have it rejected by the state comptroller, to have it rejected by the landowners when they saw what the bill would be for doing that over a 20-30 year period. And it's something that we have to keep in the back of our minds, that there are these governing rules and regulations that we can't have any say on. So let's move forward here with this proposal. On this map, you see the green areas and the orange areas, if you will. Those are the R80 and current A80 district. One of the things that we are doing is we're taking the A80 designation and making it RA80. Okay. The minimum lot size stays the same. The regulations governing whether you have to have 150 feet of frontage or 300 feet of frontage stay the same. There's no other impact other than recognizing that the rural agricultural area of the town has provisions in it that allow residential development. Currently, the A8 only identifies agricultural, but if you get into the regulations, you see that it allows residential as well. Within that green area and some of that orange area are what are called strategic farmland areas. These parcels come from the farmland protection plan mapping that was done with Ag and Markets, reviewed by everybody, adopted by the town board, and served as the basis for the conservation overlay district. In the conservation overlay district process, if you have land that is one of those strategic farmland sites, that's where the Ag Conservation Overlay District comes into play. And let's walk through this scenario here with the mapping so that you understand that we're not talking about restricting unnecessarily the development of these lands. We're actually providing an opportunity for an incentive to allow development to occur at a lower density than the 40,000 square feet, which currently exists today. By the way, those 40,000 square foot lots, the 80,000 square foot lots, I've been here 20+ years, and they were here long before me. Nobody can explain why. It's magic to have minimum lot size of 300 feet. And then if you, or 150 feet. And if it doesn't perk, you gotta have the 300 feet. If it does perk, you can have 150 feet. There's no standards that the state health department has come out with that we are aware of that says you need this much land. So it's basically a frontage issue that we're dealing with. The other thing that's involved here is that we are trying to protect, to the extent possible, road frontage development. This is the area easiest to develop. You don't have to have long driveways. It just eats up the frontage and over time limits your access to the interior portion of your lands that you either own or working. So Dan, if you throw the first one up on the screen, there's behind me you have a lot, and we've taken a lot of 60 acres. Why do we take 60 acres? That's the median lot size in these A80 and RR80 districts for ownership. So the median is 60 acres of land. With 60 acres of land, the town's long-standing requirement has been the minimum lot width must have a ratio to the lot depth of 1 to 2.5. So that you don't end up with narrow bowling alleys that you can't do anything with. So we've got a 60-acre parcel. Calculating that with 1,000 foot of frontage means you gotta have 2,500 feet of depth to come up with 60 acres. Now I know that all the parcels aren't perfect rectangles and it doesn't necessarily maybe meet everybody's needs. But it's an example of how we start with a lot configuration. The next slide shows the mineral soil groups. we pick these mineral soil groups, throw it on these parcels of land to identify, as your soil mapping does when you go for your ag exemption, where these classifications are. As you can see from this rendering, this property has soils groups 1 through 4 located in the front portion of their property nearest the road. And it's not consistent across the property, but it takes up a majority of the land across the property. So that lot configuration dictates some things that the Ag Conservation Overlay District is attempting to deal with. So under the next slide shows that under the existing regulations of 300 feet for lots that don't perk, you can get 2 300-foot wide lots across the frontage, leaving a 400-foot strip. If you choose to go into that remaining 400-foot strip, that'll leave you 100 feet to get to the rear portion, approximately 50 acres of your land. The next slide shows that if you do have perk soils, where you can put in a standard system, then the lots go down to 150 feet in width. And we're showing here 5 lots, okay, of 150 feet, which leaves 250 feet on the end for access to the interior portion of the property. So those don't change anything. All we're doing is showing you what the existing zoning regulations provide for today. The next slide begins to identify for you some of the incentives that these regulations provide for. And one incentive is that instead of having 80,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet, if you have a proposal for development that doesn't lie within the class 1 through 4 soils portion of your site, you can then have lots of 25,000 square feet, provided you can show a standard septic system operation. These lots are roughly 100 feet wide by 250 feet in depth. And in this scenario here, lots 2 through 7, those 6 lots, would be located in the rear portion of your property, away from confined soils. They would have access to a 20-foot wide area, common driveway to go back to these lots that you're proposing. The next slide is a slide that shows how you could have a combination. One of the lots wouldn't perk, so it's 300-foot wide. 3 of the lots would work, they're 150-foot wide. And in the rear of your parcel, you have 6 additional lots, okay, all within the legal limits of the cluster provisions. Right now, flag lots are not an allowed use in the town's zoning code. We are proposing to make flag lots legal for the purpose of protecting the class 1 through 4 soils. Now, we've taken this, as Hal said, to the county Ag Enhancement Board. As a committee, before they wanted to stick their necks out on the line too far, wanted to have their thoughts. They came back very favorably to their comments. The lady there from the Finger Lakes Land Trust her comment was basically, sounds so obvious, why hasn't somebody thought of this before? You know, we're protecting a resource, we're not restricting anything other than protecting that resource. So we took that very positive statement and Pete, you were there as well. Step in like who spoke, said anything about this. So we've got some direction from on the planning and the Phillips. Some direction from the Ag Enhancement Board. And we're looking to you to hear your concerns. And maybe answer questions about things that we don't see that we need to see. It's a process that we, before putting it on a formal adoption process and public hearing process, want your input on. So I think with that,
Okay.
I pretty much summarized it.
Right, thank you, Ron. This is certainly a time for questions. It's taken us a long while to understand all of it, so I don't expect people who see it or seeing it for the first time to understand it all. So fire away. What don't you understand?
What don't you like?
Well, I'd rather have questions before we form opinions, but that's a personal bias. Get you.
So I guess the first question I have, my understanding is, okay, you wanna sell off a lot, for a house. So somebody takes a look at it and says, you know, you want I wanna build here, this looks like class 1 through 4 soils. We need to consider building it someplace else on the lot, not there. And what if that isn't acceptable to the buyer, the seller? I mean, is this a recommendation or is this saying you cannot do it there?
It's an evaluation process.
Okay,
It's an educational process. It's a process that's intended to show that the town has taken minimal relief to regulating the conversion of these productive soils by pointing out to the unknown buyer that by you taking these class 1 through 4 soils, you may be affecting the balance of farming operations. And is that what you really want? I mean, most people will tell us, and have told us, they want to keep the farm in Farmington. And we're trying to figure out a way of doing that without penalizing you, the landowners, or the farmers renting from the landowners through that process. Now, if it shows that there is no other alternative available to what the applicant wants, then the planning board has satisfied seeker. It has tried to protect the farmland to the extent practical, and the resolution moves forward. It's a process that just basically says, just because somebody unknowingly loves this open square piece of land, I'm looking out across the street here, you know, on that corner, doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to have a alternate location that in the long run would conserve what they're wanting to keep, and that is the organic farming area. So that answer your.
well, I think so, so it's more of an evaluation process and a recommendation by the town, not a mandate.
That's right.
Yes, my words would be, this is a process that says, Jim, have you considered this as an alternative? And then we talk about it. I mean, the authority here is the planning board, you know, they say yay or nay on all subdivisions, but it's well, the woman from Finger Lakes Land Trust that was on the Ontario County Board said it well. She said, well, this just makes you stop and think. And that's the intent here, is to make all the stakeholders stop and think, well, okay, yeah, maybe we are wrecking some farmland, maybe we could do this. The buyer's happy, we continue to have viable farming adjacent, which if they're buying there anyway, probably they're not opposed to, so, that's, yeah, as I said earlier, it mandates a process, it doesn't mandate an outcome. Very good question. Other thoughts?
I've got a
Good to
couple.
see you here.
You too, Hal, thank you, and thank you for inviting us. Kate Crowley, Herndon Road. So a couple of things. This also has to be balanced with other attributes that are on that property. And my question is the process also going to look at things like steep slopes and other things that help to provide that rural character?
Well, I think Ron kind of alluded to the fact that in subdivisions and through the secret process, DEC could weigh in on it, on how close you were to a wetland, say, there's regs in that regard. There are limitations on building on slopes and so on. So yes, I think.
That's not.
Yeah, and that's not new. No, this proposal does not change. That stuff exists already. Is that correct? I'm getting two nodding heads over there that, those regulations are already in place.
Okay, and so that's similar to what I, remember from my time on Conservation Board in Victor. So the second question to build on that is how do you incentivize this? Because if I look at, what we would do on the last slide, it's going to be much more expensive to build in the back of that lot. And so has there been discussion about incentivizing this type of building?
Well, yes, there's been discussion about that because you can conjure up scenarios where sure it would be more expensive. The answer is that I don't believe the planning board would ever say, well, you've got to do it the most expensive way. If the expense is prohibitive, that enters the discussion of what's feasible or not, as there's give and take between the person seeking to subdivide and the planning board. So that is certainly not the intent, that you make it so restrictive that it has to be really expensive. So no, keep in mind that we're looking at a very generic hypothetical example. No parcel looks like that. We know that. And as I spent time reading through actually the existing cluster zoning code that already is in place in the town. It provides a lot of flexibility to work with the natural features and the attributes of that, whatever parcel they're considering. There's quite a bit of flexibility there. Yeah, Dan.
So the only real comment I want to add to this is, and it goes right off of what Hal was mentioning, is the flexibility. Right now, how the code reads, it's very black and white for the A80 or RR80 is you have so much frontage. And then it goes off of a septic system. If you can get down to 150 feet of frontage. I mean, when an application comes into me, that's all I'm looking at to begin with, to even make it so it can move forward. With this kind of regulations, all of a sudden that opens up the ability to now look at that land and what makes the most sense and not only rule it on road frontage. And that's the big takeaway I think that you guys need to understand is nobody's saying that, okay, we have to do it this way, but the current code does say that. I mean, it says that you need 300 feet of frontage or 150 if you have the reduction. There's no way around that. going back to what Hal just said, if we can get it to able to go over to clustering, gives us the flexibility. Now we can look at those steep slopes and we can look at the 1 through 4 soils, which is obviously the most important thing that we're talking about today for farming. But yes, those gives us a little more flexibility, I think is the big takeaway I would like to just.
The
From where,
I'm sorry.
yeah, where I sit, I mean, code is usually doesn't have flexibility. It's very black and white. This is written in a way to sort of give that gray area of, hey, can we have a conversation? And that's why it goes through multiple boards. It has to go through, well, all subdivisions go through planning board, but then it also is now asking for this as an advisory board to give a report back to planning to say, hey, yeah, we looked at different options and maybe it still comes back to the planning board of, yeah, we looked at all the options and nope, this is what they proposed is the best we can come up with. Or maybe this is a different proposal at that point that comes back.
This committee sits in a unique spot. We advocate for farming. We also advocate for land ownership, so it's a mixed role, I would say, in terms of, where you land on we want, all of us that own land are very protective of our rights as landowners, right? We're all sensitive to that. What we're worried about is what I would call, and then I'll get shot down for this, but indiscriminate development, shall we say, just bear with me with that word, when just not enough thought goes into the impact of remaining land after a subdivision occurs. So we're trying to inject that thoughtful process into it. A related question that came up with the committee is this going to take a lot longer? And the reply I get from the planning department is that most subdivision delays happen because landowners don't know the process that exists right now and get the steps in the wrong order. And if you want a subdivision proposal to get done, first you come here and find out what you need to do before you run off and hire the surveyor, that kind of thing. And so I don't think we're going to lengthen the process significantly. Nope.
So I guess a question on this cluster zoning, does the cluster zoning then give you more flexibility for things like setback
Yes.
requirements from
Yeah.
buildings? So you have some flexibility in that regard?
Absolutely.
Is one of the, I know Hal knows my opinion on this. The biggest destruction of farmland I have seen in this town is setback requirements. When you're selling off a piece of land and you have farm buildings, you have to have these huge setback requirements that encompass large acres of acreage that ends up turning into woodchucks and hedgerows and, and brush. And
that's sort of, I go back to my comment about being black and white. You're absolutely correct. The code is clear that if you subdivide right now, we have to have so many feet from ag structures to subdivide. If we go clustering in this kind of presentation that they're talking about, yeah, that I'm not saying it goes away, it gets better. Yes.
Yeah, there's many times when you'd like to adhere to a natural boundary that
Exactly.
already exists,
Mhm.
whether it's a hedgerow or, a stream or who knows what, but yeah, and you'd like flexibility to use those things and ruin less farmland in the process.
Yeah, the language in 278 of town law says that the planning board is granted the authority to waive the requirements of the zoning regulations as long as you are protecting a resource or something that has been deemed important to the community. Right now, we have things identified that are important to the community, like scenic vistas. We don't have any provisions that prohibit that development. but we don't have any development, any criteria in there to conserve to the extent practical, the class 1 through 4 soils. If we can show we're doing that, then the planning board can use that power of 278 to reduce that unnecessary setback that you're concerned about, Jim.
So that's only in clustering,
That's my next question, only in clusters.
only in clustering. They can't use that town law in the other districts. We have to get it over to clustering to allow them the authority to do that.
And you'll see on the zoning map up there that there are sites that are identified as 278 town law, where there is special zoning criteria established by the planning board as part of subdivision or site plan approval. So it's not blanketed. Everybody isn't entitled to it. You have to earn it.
So I've got, and I would encourage you to look this up, but I've got a copy of chapter 144, which is subdivision of land. It's part of the existing town code right here. And the second item, the purpose of this code says the town board finds that certain lands may not lend themselves to conventional development as designated by their zoning district. This section is established to enable and encourage flexibility of design in the development of land in such a manner as to, and then it lists most appropriate use, preserve natural and ecological qualities of environmentally sensitive lands, and preserve larger areas of open space, both for recreation and environmental conservation uses. So, and this is town code already. This is, again, this is not new. That's the language that currently exists. But that's just to show you that right out of the chute, the cluster zoning, the intent is to work with the unusual circumstances that we have lots of in this town, let's face it.
Anyone else with questions? I would like to have Dan explain to everybody here how they can tell their friend, how you can tell your friends and neighbors who weren't able to be with us today, that how they can view this meeting online, comfort of their living room, to hear what was discussed, to understand where we're at. And then, Dan, why don't you?
Yeah, so as Ron's alluding to, everything we've talked about today has been recorded. The slides that are up there we're actually in the middle of a Zoom meeting. We will turn that meeting into a YouTube recording. And the town does have a YouTube channel, which has all of our meetings, but this will also be shared as one of the presentations that will be up. As soon as we post it, which will probably be in a day or so. So I would say next Monday at the latest, it will be available for viewing. And if you just go on YouTube and look for the town of Farmington, our page will come right up and it will be in the list. They go in by how we put them in. So when I put this one in, it will be at the top, but when another meeting happens, then it will start moving its way down. And they will be there indefinitely because we do not take them down. So per the town's policy. So they will always be there for availability for you guys to go back and listen, re-listen, or share with anybody that wasn't here, the information that was discussed today. And if questions do come up, well, we're available here Monday through Friday by email or phone to try to answer those for you. Or obviously the board up here is available too to try to answer those questions the best that we can. So it is available. The other thing that Hale did mention earlier, minutes of this meeting will be posted on the town's website as well. So if you didn't want to listen to the recording and you wanted to go back and read something, they'll all be posted there after it's approved.
You know, can I bring up a
That's
point?
it, because-
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a point. I assume if you have ag exemption on your farmland now, that's gonna override this new plan. So you have to either take it out, I believe, 5 years and off from the egg. Or you gotta pay back so many years plus interest. That's state law. I think it's gonna override this one, if you're gonna do more than.
Well, what John's referring to here is converting farmland that's currently getting an ag exemption is subject to a 5-year clawback. If it's converted
Right, just so
to
they
non-ag
understand.
use.
I think that's gonna
So
override this one.
well, I mean, that's a kind of a separate issue, John.
Yes, I know.
I mean, it's a
Just-
taxation
it's just
issue.
out
We're
there, yeah.
not doing anything in the realm of taxation, but that still applies.
Right.
Is there anything, other stuff from the committee? Good, well, we should be, right? We've spent enough time on this.
If I could, the committee's got a meeting coming up in February on the 20th. Here in this room at 6:30. Purpose of that meeting is to learn of some lands that want to be considered.
There are 2 applications for conservation easements that are current Genesee Land Trust is working. You guys may not know this is hot news. That we will be reviewing at our next meeting, February.
The reason I bring up that is that this gives you basically almost a month to consider what you've heard here today, to look at what's online. If you have questions about things that you want, let me know. I can send you copies electronically. I just assume not cut a forest down to make paper copies, but anything you want, and then hopefully that would give you the opportunity to let the board know at that point, oh, I got thinking about this, and what about, how does this relate to what you're doing? And
Absolutely.
it would allow us to move forward one way or another with getting this thing back to the process for formal adoption is referred to, which means seeker. It means going to the county planning board, going to the county ag advisory committee, going to, from the ag advisory committee to ag and markets, which the county ag enhancement board under ag and markets law has the right to request review and comment by that agency. So, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process that we're going to take one step at a time, but we think we're ready to take that first step. And we want to hear from you as to whether we're going to be able to do it or not. We really appreciate your coming out today. I turn it back to you, Hal.
If there's nothing else from any of our visitors, we just. Yeah, we're not making a recommendation today, but that time is rapidly approaching. Planning the next meeting, February 20th, that's the 3rd Thursday, that's our normal meeting time, 6:30 in the evening. Sorry, Jim, this might be the one and only afternoon meeting, but it worked, look at this.
Well, thank you for having this, and thanks for inviting us.
I thought we had this so he could zoom in from Florida while he was having his, you know.
Well,
I wish.
clearly he's not in Florida. If there's nothing else, we're gonna call it a day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.